Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's discussion on a long topic, whiteness and poetry, art, and film. I'm very pleased to be with you today and to introduce our exciting group of panelists. My name is Amy Randall, and I'm professor and chair of the History Department and associate director for the Center for Arts and Humanities. This is the second event in our Center for the Arts and Humanities Spring Faculty Fellow Series. If you missed the previous one featuring the artist Ryan Carrington, you can still access the event via a recording on our website. So I'm again very pleased to introduce our panelists for today, Robin Tremblay McGaw, Kathy Lou Schultz, and Lauren Baines. Robin Tremblay McGaw has taught in the English department at Santa Clara University for the last 10 years. She is a 2020 Center for the Arts and Humanities Fellow. Robin received her PhD in literature from UC Santa Cruz and an MLIS from UC Berkeley. Her teaching encompasses writing and rhetoric, film, poetics, and poetry, literatures of the world, multimodal projects, narrative and narrative theory, and feminist and queer theory. She's the author of a book of poems, Dear Reader, Ethereal Spear, and co-editor with Rob Halpern of From Our Hearts to Yours, New Narratives as Contemporary Practice. Her poetry has appeared in a variety of venues. Most recently, her poem Archive was published in Plumwood Mountain Journal, an Australian journal of eco-poetics and eco-poetry. And her essay poem piece, The Queen's English Ain't Her Own, is in queensenglish.mp3, Poetry, Philosophy, Performativity. Her article, Sounding Out, Nathaniel McKay's Ontological Archive in Fugitive Run, is forthcoming in the Journal of Narrative Theory. Dr. Kathy Lou Schultz, who's with us today, is the Catherine and Charles Freeburg University professor and director of the Women's and Gender Studies program at the University of Memphis, where she's also an academic research fellow at the Benjamin Hooks Institute for Social Change. A literary historian, critic, and poet, her research interests include the relationship of the arts to social change, poetry and poetics, Africana studies, and gender and sexuality studies. Some recent projects include scholarship on the Afro-modernist epic, the Black arts movement, Afro-surrealism and the Caribbean, and San Francisco New Narrative writers. She's the author of the Afro-modernist epic and literary history, Tolson Hughes Baraka, as well as 4 collections of poems recently, Biting Midge, Works in Prose, and Some Vague Wife. Schultz's articles have appeared in numerous scholarly journals, including Contemporary Literature, Jacket 2, Journal of Modern Literature, Plume Poetry, and anthologies, including Some Other Blues, New Perspectives on Amiri Baraka, The Companion to Modernist Poetry, From Our Hearts to Yours, New Narrative as Contemporary Practice, and Efforts and Affections, Women Poets on Mentorship. Her poems are also published in Bombay Gin, Cleaver Magazine, Fence Magazine, 14 Hills, Hamboni, Marsh Hawk Review, Miracle Monocle, Mirage No. 4, New American Writing, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and other journals. Lots to read. Lauren Baines is also with us today. Many of you might already know her. She's the interim director of Santa Clara University's Dissay Museum, where she has served as an assistant director since late 2016. Baines recently joined the board of the California Association of Museums, and for many years served on the steering committee of Gen Arts Silicon Valley, a program of SV Creates. As a curator, arts administrator, and performing artist, she deeply values interdisciplinary approaches and creating opportunities to bring people and communities together in dialogue and exchange through the arts. She is committed to advancing social justice, decolonization, and diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion work in and through the arts sector. Baines received her BA and BS degrees from Santa Clara University, triple majoring in art history, psychology, and dance, and her MFA from Mills College. So today we will start off with Robin reading from some of her current work. Again, welcome everyone. Thank you.
Hello, I'm going to share my screen and see. Okay, first of all, thank you to the Center for the Arts and Humanities for their support this year and for the opportunity to share a part of this project that I'm working on and to have this conversation with Kathy Lou Schultz and Lauren Baines. Kathy Lou and I are longtime friends, first generation college grads and writers and scholars who are very much interested in issues of class and race and feminism. Lauren has been tremendously supportive in getting Santa Clara student art reviews published on the DeSace Museum website. I was really looking forward to spending more time with the museum's California Stories from Tamian to Santa Clara, which opened in January 2020, just some weeks prior to lockdown. Lauren tells me this is merely phase one of the museum's reimagining of its exhibits. In 2017, Lauren curated the exhibit Rewriting the Narrative, which challenges social narratives, including racial narratives. I'm grateful to both of these folks for our conversation that we're going to have a little bit later today. So I want to start with some background, a little background about me and this project. Born on a Texas Army base in Killeen, brought up in New Hampshire with a brief foray into rural Minnesota on a farm in a town called Freedom, which is to say in spaces that understood themselves as white. I have lived in San Francisco since the mid-1980s, where I came to go to graduate school. My teachers and professors were white. I did not have a class taught by a Black faculty member until my PhD program, which I began in my late 30s. This is one version of the United States of America. When I was in high school, I worked at a Wendy's in Concord, New Hampshire, and the young manager there, Stephen Arthur, was Black. I have a foggy intellectual but clear emotional memory of my parents saying or intimating to me that I should not bring home a Black boyfriend. My parents say this isn't true. I can't say from where exactly, but the proviso was imparted, if diffusely, that is, nearly everywhere. My doctoral dissertation, Community and Contestatory Writing Practices in the San Francisco Bay Area, 1970 to present, completed in 2009, explored a group of Bay Area experimental writers and the contestations among them, contestations that explicitly and implicitly were predicated on differences of power and location and poetics, differences of race, sexuality, gender, class. Benjamin Moore's White is a creative critical project I started around 2017. In many ways, it's a project, like most projects, with a lifetime of prehistory. It was ignited by my reading and writing and lived experience. In 2014, Claudia Rankine published her book, Citizen, an American Lyric, and I began reading and teaching this work at Santa Clara and at Bard College in the Language and Thinking program and the Institute for Writing and Thinking. This text and her most recent one, Just Us, an American Conversation, provocatively read the world, a phrase that for me brings to mind Paulo Freire and also Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, Audre Lorde, Tisa Bryant, Gloria Anzaldúa, Nathaniel Mackey, Tanya Foster, Kathy Park Hong, Arthur Jafa, Layli Long Soldier, and many other writers, artists, and scholars of color who have long practiced reading the world, the word, whiteness, and lived experience. Rankine's Citizen and her subsequent establishment of the Racial Imaginary Institute have moved me to think about the work I might do to notice what's going on, how whiteness is constructed and shaped and undulates, a tectonic wave organizing the social, personal, creative, and institutional worlds I inhabit, that I am moved by and move through, that I am complicit with and need to work to undo. The most important work on whiteness has been done by BIPOC artists, writers, and thinkers. Though there has been work done by Tim Wise, Peggy McIntosh, and recently Jess Rowe's White Flights, Race, Fiction, and the American Imagination. But why aren't more writers doing more on this topic? As someone curious about language in the arts in all their forms, but perhaps most especially the visual arts, somewhere along the way, the names of paint colors drew me: lapis lazuli, cadmium yellow, ultramarine, burnt sienna. I have longed to visit the Forbes pigment collection at Harvard University since I first heard about it. Someday. There are research questions to unearth there about where materials for pigments come from, what was done to extract them, and what human and other costs this entailed. But closer to home, my partner had a hefty sample palette set of Benjamin Moore house paint colors. It looks like this. These colors are each named and numbered. The names of these colors, as you will hear in the piece that I will read a bit from in just a moment, speak volumes. And like everything, they were not developed in a vacuum, but reflect cultural values and prejudices. The company itself is also interesting because it's been around since brothers Benjamin and Robert Moore founded it in 1883 in Brooklyn. In the 1930s, the company created a fictional female representative, Betty Moore, who was played by a variety of white actresses and appeared on radio shows into the 1950s. The company and its history suddenly seemed to open up and offer a way into investigating the American institution of white supremacy. How were and are these paint colors named? Who worked in the factories? Is it a Benjamin Moore paint factory that appears in Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man? In 2018, some Americans turned their attention to the monuments to white supremacy all around us, and people, particularly young people, began tearing them down and advocating for their removal. I started thinking about monuments. I was shocked then. It has been more discussed of late with the proposal to rename the bridge the John Lewis Bridge, to discover that the Edmund Pettus Bridge, a bridge I associated with the civil rights movement, built in 1940, is named after Edmund Winston Pettus, a former Confederate Brigadier General, US Senator, and leader of the Alabama KKK. Clearly, there was more to learn, think about, and work to undo. So my piece, Benjamin Moore's White, began to also open up to include thinking about monuments, about language and its origins, and the magnetic filings of the past, including obsolete usages and meanings and how they cling to and even structure the now. There is room for a lot in this piece, including noticing and thinking about the now nearly ubiquitous use of alt text tags to make images on the web accessible. When I imported these images into my document, these alt text captions demanded a response. You'll likely hear lots of quotes, definitions, excerpts in this piece. I've included some images and text from it on some slides I'll share with you. I will read a section from this, and then Kathy Lou and then Lauren and I will get to talk more widely. And if there's time, we might hear another section that also includes a meditation, a reading of Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, a film I watched again with students this past fall in my course Reading Film. While you might not think of whiteness and race when you recall this film, like so many cultural productions, as Toni Morrison demonstrated in Playing in the Dark, this film too seems to require figures of imagined Blackness, visual and auditory, to illuminate the white world it frames. Okay, it seems like my computer is up. I thought it was going to be frozen. Okay. From Benjamin Moore's White. To illuminate the white world it frames. Waiting, invisible for those who inhabit it, a feeling somewhere that the feeling itself is, or those who get so used to its inhabitants. Cave galleries, raffia screen, the dreamer sees fixation of the body. Stretch yourself to breaking the point, inseparable, in secret, between every kind X and image. Flesh scribes in a second, the world testifies. Longer, for a long time. In front of 3 images of Adam and Eve, on the left is Donald Jackson and Chris Tomlin's illumination from the St. John's Bible. In the center, Adam and Eve are Northern Europeans in a garden from which they will soon be expelled. The third is a stencil print of Sado Watanabe's couple. When asked what they notice, the class offers up observations about the strangeness that Adam is always on the left. In Jackson's print, Eve's smile is malicious. In one image, there is a garden, while in the others, they are depicted in isolation. One uses colors and a decorative border. Letters, blood, word. In experience, something pink takes root. In the back of the group, about to pass into the archives, breaking for a silence, waiting to be broken. I ask if anyone notices this couple in Jackson's print is African. I swear I see them see but not say. Research will inform me that Jackson has fashioned Adam and Eve as Ethiopian from the Karo tribe. We pass before we can talk about Watanabe's stylized stencil influenced by menjie, Japanese folk art, made with kozo, soybean milk, on washi. In various senses, watching, outcast, something sharp, burning. Founded in 1883, Benjamin Moore Paints is an American company that produces paint, including many, at least 50 whites. For example, you might buy Genesis, patriotic, snow or chalk, pure, natural cream or lambskin, marble white, sugary Xanadu. At Eric's, the usual, sesame beef, the chef's special chicken with portobello mushrooms, 1 white, 1 brown rice, double parked hair's breadth of a space so the J train can pass. Summer fog, food to go is picked up at the back. It is an off-peak time. A Black woman is there ahead of me, a white woman. A Chinese waitress comes up. I give her my phone number. She turns to the kitchen, of which a peak is visible, gleaming white, steamy stacks of cardboard cartons, scent of sauteed garlic, ginger. She is getting my food. A car honks outside. In the corner of my attention, I am aware, I am wondering, has the woman standing there, the second hand on a clock moves, been helped? The waitress arrives with, I do not speak my thought into the room, its high ceilings, fans gently whir. The woman was there when I entered before I arrived. My food, probably, her food isn't ready. Turning away with my white plastic bag, I hear a waiter asking if the woman needs help. A white colleague says I have racialized this. What dreams this pasty pablum, their beauty, whiteness, and shame-faced grace, a man who, by his whiteness, much resembled innocency at first blush. Snow, with reference to the color of a person's skin, face, etc., lightness or fairness of complexion, especially when regarded as beautiful or desirable. 1827 M. Faraday, chemical manipulations. Heat a little silver to whiteness. The idea is to open each bucket and put in 10 drops of this stuff, he said. Then you stir it till it disappears. This optic white, that's it, as white as George Washington's Sunday go to meeting wig white. It's the purest white that can be found. Nobody makes a paint any whiter. This batch right here is heading for a national monument. Alt text, a person holding a dog. Alt text, simply white cloud 9, white opulence. A monument, a statue, building, or other structure erected to commemorate a famous person or notable person or event. Torn, afresh, lacerating, yawning, and uncannily consistent. Something that serves as a reminder of, or witness, or tribute to a way of life, attitude, achievement. Soft tissues of the body. What does violence look like? Emmett Till marker number 1, Money, Mississippi. 2 commercial structures, modest homes, filling station, 2-story brick building missing its roof, the grocery where the 14-year-old walked in. Other markers. The Tallahatchie County Courthouse, Sumner, Mississippi, the 1-story building with Breland and Witten lawyers still painted on a couple of windows. They are 2 of the murderer's 5 attorneys. Brothers Roy Bryant and J.W. Millam were tried and acquitted in September 1955. Alt text, a group of people sitting in a room. Alt text, white cloud cover, albescent glacier, desolate, alabaster white. White cotton shirts, men in white cotton shirts, sleeves rolled to the elbows, leaning to one side, a sea of whiteness, a scene of violence. What is cottoned to? To cotton to is an idiom born of the cotton industry, meaning to get to know or understand something. In the textile industry, when a fiber cottons, it does a good job of blending in with other fibers to make cloth. Note distances. From Money to Tallahatchie, 28.4 miles. From Money to outside of Drew to the barn where Millam and Bryant savagely beat Till, 20 miles. The small town of Glendora where Millam lived, 15 miles further. A monument, an enduring, memorable, outstanding, or imposing example of some quality, attribute, etc. In plural, license plates, stamps, national parks, cemeteries, water fountains, dams, bridges, roads, schools, state and city symbols, ships, holidays and observances, highways, barracks, a tomb, a sepulcher, obsolete, a piece of information given in writing, obsolete, going around, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, Jefferson Davis Highway, the Stone Mountain $50 with Lee and Jackson on horseback, printed by the US Mint in 1925. Lee and Jackson on a 4-cent stamp issued in March of 1937. White, violet, violent, medicinal, Victorian, shrinking, alabaster, messengers. So we're going to shift a bit. I think Kathy Lou and Lauren are going to take us somewhere akin, but elsewhere.
Okay, so hopefully now you can see and hear me, and you can see and hear a photograph in front of you. Well, you can see the photograph anyway. I'll just pause just for a couple of moments for you to take the photograph in. Some of you might recognize it from different contexts, but if you haven't seen it before, you might just consider for a bit what is being pictured here. Frantz Fanon writes, yes, everyone must be involved in the struggle for the sake of the common salvation. There are no clean hands, no innocent bystanders. We are all in the process of dirtying our hands in the quagmire of our soul and the terrifying void of our minds. Any bystander is a coward or a traitor. A bystander denotes a person who sees an event but chooses not to participate in it. There is even the so-called bystander effect in social psychology that suggests that people are less likely to intervene to help someone being victimized when others are also present. A spectator, however, seeks out the event, experiencing heightened feelings such as revulsion or desire while consuming the images. In the work of some filmmakers and theorists, however, Fanon's cowardly, traitorous bystander is often rendered as spectator. The phrase, every spectator is a coward or traitor, is repeated throughout many of these texts. The difference between a bystander and a spectator is significant for understanding what Claudia Rankine has called indwelling when describing visual elements in her work, especially the collaborative situation videos that she's made with John Lucas. Close looking or indwelling allows viewers moments of identification with the people in the frame, or as Rankine states, a performance of switching your body out with the body in the frame and moving methodically through pathways of thoughts and positioning. How might this apply to the photograph? Appearing in section 6 with the poem script entitled February 26, 2012, in memory of Trayvon Martin, the photograph you are seeing titled Public Lynching and dated August 30, 1930 is a well-known historical artifact. However, Rankine and Lucas's reproduction of it removes the hanging Black bodies, highlighting the excited faces of the white mob. Rankine and Lucas had to obtain permission in republishing the photograph to alter it in this way. The placement of the photograph in the section dedicated to Trayvon Martin suggests that George Zimmerman's murder of Martin was a vigilante lynching. And here I've shown the title and the pages of the piece, the way they appear in Citizen. The situation videos that I've referenced can be found on various places, YouTube, Rankine's homepage. John Lucas has a Vimeo page. And Lucas says that there are multi-genre responses to contemporary America. The videos exist around experiences in individual lives. These experiences turn situations that resonate with us, not only as people, but as citizens. So I'm isolating a photograph that appears with this poem script, but there's also an additional text, which we won't have time to explore here, which is available online. So I wanted you to know that there's this multiplicity, this multimedia way in which this script exists. So I'll go back to the photograph. Considering lynching historically as ritualized murder, Coretha Mitchell argues that the predictable steps and their standardizations across the country reflect white agreement with mainstream declarations that African Americans were immoral and bestial, that they were not citizens and perhaps not fully human. In addition, Mitchell shows that this remarkable uniformity reflected that lynching parties were participating in a kind of ritualized theater. Rather than being drawn into the theater of ritualized murder and the spectacle of it, Rankine stresses the need to redirect our gaze to the white spectators. Studying the fascination, delight, and excitement on the faces of the white crowd, rather than staring at the spectacle of hanging Black bodies, which would thus assume the same role as the white spectators in the photograph, readers of Citizen are challenged to consider the role that spectatorship plays in Black death and Black suffering, just as in another poem script in Citizen about Hurricane Katrina, which challenges us to be with the victims of the storm, rather than assuming the role of a spectator viewing and consuming their suffering on television. Being with the white perpetrators in the photograph challenges the white reader in particular to confront photographic evidence of the gratification of pleasure and desire that the white crowd experiences while taking part in and viewing ritualized murder. The distinction between being with rather than looking at highlights Citizen's role in defining the collective you. Which you are you a part of? Who are you with in this scene? We can thus consider this photo, as it is altered, as a scene of whiteness, revealing the rituals in which white supremacy is enacted in the US, showing how whiteness can be an invitation to enact violence without penalty, and displaying evidence that whiteness can equal death for many African Americans. Okay, I'm going to share another slide of scene of whiteness dealing with photographs. And I believe that Lauren is going to have some comments about the so-called Shirley cards.
Yes, thank you, Kathy Lou, and I welcome you into this conversation as well as Robin. So today we're going to think a little bit about film photography and color film. And so Kodak in the 1950s essentially had a monopoly on color film and the film and also the processing of that film. And in the 1950s, the federal government essentially stepped in to dismantle that monopoly, and printing houses were set up across the nation, but they needed to be able to calibrate their printers to Kodak film. So to be able to support this process, and they wouldn't necessarily have technicians at all the sites, Kodak created what you see here and what came to be known as Shirley cards that would allow the printers on these disparate sites, these independent print houses, to calibrate their printers so that the color was accurate to what Kodak imagined them to be. You might notice something about all the models, all the individuals. So traditionally, these were white women. It goes a step further. Many times they were marked, and you can see this in the image on the right, with the word normal. So as the printers calibrated their imagery, not only were they adjusting tones for lighter skinned individuals, they were very, not so subtly, told that this was normal. This was the skin tone of individuals to be photographed, to be shown. This was how lighting worked. This was how color worked. It wasn't until much later that Shirley cards with a more multiracial demographic were released. We're seeing this more in the 1990s, 40 plus years later. And so I offer this in this moment as we're thinking not only about whiteness, but also the role of visual art, and also to expand into the role of photography. And we won't have a full discussion around that today, but so many times in common parlance, we think of photography as kind of this neutral. We're just capturing a moment in time, but there is so much that goes into the decision of what is photographed and what is not. And then with color film, who is going to be displayed in, shall we say, the best light through this color film, through this technology. And even today with digital cameras, there are remnants throughout the system, throughout the field of photography, between lighting and the calibration, even within digital cameras, of let's say, an ease with photographing lighter subjects than individuals with darker skin.
Lauren, can I just jump in for a minute and say this also reminds me of stuff that's been in the news recently about AI and technologies around, I guess maybe it emerged with electric cars, self-driving cars, like not recognizing Black pedestrians. And so there's a way in which there are vestiges. I think even that word is not accurate. There are ways in which it's very recalcitrant and perpetuated in all kinds of technologies.
Yeah, in policing, also in facial recognition software, the software is not good at differentiating between people with darker skin. So people will be identified as being in a photo of, committing a crime or being a suspect, and it's not them at all because the technology can't distinguish between them as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, should I move on to another depiction of white women? I'm going to go ahead. Okay, so Amira Baracus played Dutchman, which he says he wrote in 1962, and it's first produced as a play in 1964, was made into a film in 1967. And you can still view this film. Often the entire film is available on YouTube, but people also own rights appropriately. But you can see the photos that they've selected. These are the two main characters that appear throughout the play. When a girl like Lula gets with the man like Clay, she can love him or kill him, or maybe both. And then these quotes, like a bolt jolt from the third rail. Okay, and this play continues to be performed in all kinds of venues. In the Times, I read about a production in New York that took place in a sauna where people had to walk downstairs and sit in a hot sauna to watch the play. The intended setting is a subway car. And in terms of recent productions of the play, this is a photo that I found of a production by the Nebraska Repertory Theater in 2019, which I think really well captures the characters the way that I imagine them. And when I teach this play, which I do almost every semester, this is what I have in mind. You can see that she's very petulant and he is very nervous, which he should be given what happens in the play. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I use this play, this character in my teaching. So Lula is a character that demands that we look both backward and forward in history. I want to start with Ida B. Wells Barnett's A Red Record. So that's 1895. The subtitle of which is Tabulated Statistics and Alleged Causes of Lynching in the United States. This is a work of investigative journalism that reveals true causes of lynchings as opposed to the myths that were used to justify terrorizing and murdering African Americans. And one of those so-called reasons, which is applicable to this play, the third on Wells Barnett's list is the supposed rape of white women by Black men. The first reason that in Wells Barnett's text, she says that white people say that they need to stamp out quote unquote race riots. This is very current. We see all this legislation about infringing on people's right to assemble by wanting to make riots illegal. And the second is the fear, as named in the text, of Negro domination. But what that was really about was that Black people were exercising their right to vote. So you can see that is also very current. The real reasons for lynching during Reconstruction are all related to Black empowerment, such as exercising the right to vote or owning a store that competed with a white-owned store. This is what happened to Wells's friend who owned the People's Grocery, whose murder led Wells to first begin investigating cases of lynching. So I'll drop another slide here. The dreaded The Birth of a Nation. There are a number of different covers or depictions of this. Sometimes it's called an American monument, which would be very applicable for Robin's work. This one I chose because it calls it a mighty spectacle. So this narrative of the construction of Black men as criminal is reinscribed in this film, which I'll briefly talk about, which will be familiar to many of you. And so you can see this narrative of Southern gentility reinscribed in Birth of a Nation in 1915. It's a narrative film that reinforces the Southern white man's position on top of the racialized, gendered hierarchy, which is symbolic in presenting the power of the white father, but it's also real, right, in everyday life through economic and political practices, for example. So the white father on the top of our symbolic order, his role is to save the social order and keep it intact, right? So white man at the top, Black women aren't even mentioned in this paradigm, which is very significant. So the scenario that is enacted within the film is that the white father, who is a character who's called Little Colonel, needs to save the symbolic order through preventing the so-called evil of miscegenation, which is a continued obsession, particularly in the South. This scenario necessitates the construction of a white female figure who's called Little Sister in the movie, and she represents supposedly purity and goodness, but she's also helpless and without her own agency. There's a Black male figure who's called Gus. He's also a freedman and a soldier. And what plays out in the film is that Little Colonel needs to save the purity of Little Sister from Gus, who importantly is played by a blacked up white actor, who is, one writer has called this character the embodiment of evil, inferiority, and otherness. But it's also important to keep in mind that it's a figure of imagined, uncontainable sexual and physical power. So we can think of contemporary depictions of Black men, such as George Floyd, Rodney King, and others. Little Colonel authorizes the racial, gendered, and economic hierarchy in the South and leads a company of white characters to join the Klan and lynch Gus, destroying any power Gus may have to disrupt the white patriarchal order. And this is a castration that restores the law of the white father. So if you map this onto Dutchman, you'll see a great similarity in what Baraka was doing when he wrote this in 1962. So however, Baraka, writing the play in 1962, which was first performed in 1964, creates an aggressively sexual white woman who, as a representation of America, seduces Clay into believing that the nation will embrace him if only he follows the rules of assimilation, represented, for example, in his clothing. This is a very accurate description in the play of how he's supposed to look in this buttoned up suit and tie and buttoned up shirt. And also through the reading material, when she first spies him through the window, he's reading. So he represents education and also middle-class values. Lula spies Clay from the subway platform and enters his train, seeking him out. And Baraka has said of Lula, he said many things. This is one quote that I captured. "I saw her as a metaphor for America. She represented temptation and seduction, but also death, if not of the flesh, then of the spirit." At the end of the play, Lula stabs Clay, which is again another symbolic castration, and the other passengers, as the enforcers of American values, follow her orders to throw Clay's body off the train. Lula then seeks out the next unsuspecting Black man to victimize. In part, Clay represents a young Baraka as Leroy Jones and his quest to become the, quote, great Black poet who will be accepted into an integrated but mostly white avant-garde in Greenwich Village. In addition, Lula's red hair, which we can see here, links her with the image of the white devil, and throughout the play, she's eating apples and tossing them around the subway car. That obviously links her with Eve, who in some interpretations is responsible for luring Adam to eat the fruit of knowledge, thus disobeying God's will. That a white woman is metonymic with the nation as that which entices, but which will bring retribution if a Black man tries to possess it, reveals the role that white female sexuality continues to play as a perceived possession of white men rather than of white women themselves. And going back to Ida B. Wells Barnett, some Black men who were chosen for punishment or death in the late 19th century were in consensual relationships with white women. That these women had chosen Black men seems an injury too great for white masculinity to bear. Then, as now, whiteness operates as an unquestioned right to possess, particularly for men, but also for women, to own, as in our neighborhood, our schools, our nation. It is no accident that some white people storming the Capitol on January 6th carried Confederate flags, proudly proclaiming a heritage of owning people of African descent, which reappears in contemporary life in scenes of whiteness that I've mentioned, such as the design to disenfranchise Black people through legislation, the literal move to stop the count of Black people's votes in the last presidential election in cities including Philadelphia, which have a high number of Black voters, and the powers of the police state that cannot curb its desire to murder Black people in the streets, or as in the case of Breonna Taylor, asleep at home in their beds. So we can see a strong through line from Reconstruction through the 1960s when Baraka was writing this to the contemporary situation that we find ourselves in. So I'm going to stop sharing now.
And I am going to start sharing. Give me a moment here.
Maybe while you're doing that, Lauren, I'll just say that, of course, in the Emmett Till case, which is referenced in the section from the poem that I read, Carol Bryant, the wife of Roy Bryant, is accused Till of wolf whistling. She later, was it in 2018, finally publicly stated that, in fact, that was a total fabrication and a lie. Yeah.
There was also one of the white women accusers in the Scottsboro Boys case, which is complex, on her deathbed confessed that the accusation that the Black young men on the train were trying to rape her and her friend were false. So it takes a long time for history to come out sometimes, but eventually it does.
Let's see. Can you let me know if that is sharing?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to plant a few seeds in the coming minutes to look at museums and the role of museums and institutions in presenting art and narratives, and what we, what I'm calling here and what others have called myth of neutrality and objectivity, and really where the decisions, where the choices are happening behind the scenes perhaps, and sometimes very publicly as well. Spaces are not neutral, collections are not neutral, exhibitions are not neutral. And the reason I have a white cube on the screen is to talk a little bit about the history of the white cube in museums. And we hear this term, but where does that really come from? And before we dive fully into collections and exhibitions, thinking a little bit about why do we walk into white gallery spaces? Why do we expect to see that? And in 1976, there was an article in Art Forum, or really a 3-part article that was talking about inside the white cube. And this is the first time that we hear the white cube named as such, but it really was nothing new by that time. White museum galleries, white walls were really starting much earlier in the 1930s, but individuals who have been tracing this history see it as a gradual progression that really aligns also with this sense of curation and who is making the decisions of what goes into exhibitions. And stepping back a little bit with collections themselves, we tend to think of a certain level of objectivity of what is being collected, of what is coming together and just presenting what exists, but really collections are built on processes of colonization, imperialism, systems of white supremacy. And we see in the last several years that this is more publicly addressed, that museums are grappling with this, but the effects and processes of settler colonialism are infused within the structures of museums and the decisions that have been made. And how do we change that? I'm going to take a little bit of the Day Cessay as kind of our case study and talking a little bit about this. And so we opened our doors in 1955 as the Day Cessay Art Gallery and Museum. We're located on SU's campus. We are on the unceded territory of the Ohlone people. And our collection began through the bequest of Isabel Day Cessay, who asked the museum with this bequest of land and family heirlooms and other monies to found a museum in her brother's name. So we are actually named after Ernest Day Cessay, who was a student of Santa Clara College. And our collection began with that bequest and the donation of about 100 paintings by Ernest Day Cessay and the family heirlooms. And throughout our history, the Day Cessay has not had an acquisitions budget. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But that is to say, predominantly our collection, which is now 13,000 plus objects of art and history, has come predominantly through donation. And again, we started as an art gallery and museum. It was not until the mid-1970s that history was added as a second focal area for the museum. And since about 1979, the Day Cessay Museum has housed a permanent exhibition on the lower level of our museum, which has gone under several revisions, but essentially what was called for many years the California History Exhibition, aimed to trace pre-contact Native California through Mission era and Ranchero periods, and then into the early college history. And this display began pretty sparse and bare and grew over the years with additional donations and increased research. But again, this was coming through donations. So again, what other individuals had collected, what they were deeming worth collecting themselves and donating, and what aligned with our goals for this exhibition and our collection overall, which is to say, we had an exhibition that was tracing Native California. We're on the land of the Ohlone people. We are the de facto mission museum for Mission Santa Clara Diocese, but we did not actually have many works created by Ohlone artists or individuals. And they were not involved in the initial development of this exhibition. So again, it was established in the late 1970s. It really wasn't until the mid 80s that Ohlone individuals were part of the development of the exhibition with us. And the Thule House that you see here was created with Norm Kidder, a naturalist and specialist who worked with members of the Ohlone community. But it was not really until 1990s that Native Americans, that Ohlone community members, were brought into the museum as consultants and in partners in telling the story. And former director Rebecca Shop established that first Native American roundtable. So in the first 40 years of the museum's life, we were not in dialogue with the individuals whose story we were attempting to tell. It was the story, the narrative of our perspective of white museum practitioners, and it was telling a story that was incomplete. And so with the redesign, and perhaps we'll talk more about that later, we've really looked to change where information is coming from, whose voice is included, and how to demonstrate the contemporary role and existence of the Ohlone community, which is so important in telling their story, to work against what has been done in anthropology and in other spaces to say that the Ohlone individuals were no longer in existence. And so not only through this exhibition, but through our temporary exhibitions and our collecting policies, we do strive to work against this. And I'm sharing just a couple moments as examples. In 2017, the exhibition Rewriting the Narrative considered the multitude of ways that artists can write, rewrite, or call into question social narratives. And this drew from our permanent collection as well as works on loan. And through it, individuals were addressing not only aspects of the art historical canon, but questions around political movements, around historical events, including the Japanese internment camps. And so spanning paintings and photographs, prints and video, the artworks in this exhibition examined are accepted and at times unchallenged social narratives. And the artists were asking us to face what we have maybe accepted as fact, as the full story, and as neutral. And what's interesting as well is several of the pieces in this exhibition actually came from our class acquisitions project, which is a way that we are working to expand our collection. So as I mentioned, we do not have an acquisition budget, but occasionally through grants or from an individual donor, we're able to seek out pieces of art to intentionally purchase and collect. And when we have that opportunity, we work with students to involve them in this process of understanding not only the demographics of our current collection and how we would like to work against that and change that, but also the role of museums in becoming these cultural and memory institutions. And so since 2006, the Desaussé Museum has partnered with the Department of Art and Art History at SCU and collaborated on 9 acquisition projects, purchasing a total of 45 works. And you're seeing a few of those here. We have in the center, Carrie Mae Weems' Not Mayonnaise Type. And then on the right, you see a screen grab from our website actually that shows a few of the projects and a few of the works that have come in through that. We recently also worked with students on curating some virtual exhibitions that are about to launch on our website. And I just want to share one reflection of kind of how involving students in the curation, in the collection, is really, in a way, how we are doing work to change this structure and this approach to museums. One student shared that one thing I've learned from this project is that creating a museum exhibition takes a lot more time and effort than just hanging some art on the gallery walls. I did not realize how much work happens before getting to the point where work is actually hung up. And while that quote is really speaking to the work the students did to understand the specific photographs that they were researching and bringing them into the context for the exhibition they were curating, I think it speaks widely to this idea of objectivity and neutrality. And again, back to the white cube of museums, that even today, while we might feel that is sterile or in a way a blank slate, there's a choice in having white walls in museums. And as we transitioned away from more salon style and having artworks hung with more space between them and at eye level, these were all choices that were being made. And the white walls, are they truly neutral? How are we best displaying artwork? Are we creating a space of examining an artwork without other distraction? Are we further instilling a sense that artwork lives in a realm beyond the average citizen and therefore we must rely on curators and museum professionals to tell us what to think when we're viewing work? What is the dialogue that is happening and happening with these white walls? And I will, as I pass this back to Robin, let her know that our white walls are whisper white. It is not Benjamin Moore, it's Dunn Edwards, but it is whisper white.
But maybe that'll change.
Right.
I'm really curious, actually, Lauren, if there will be like artwork from the Ohlone community, from practitioners now that might be included in the museum or featured in the museum, since the exhibit sort of focuses on the past. And as you're saying, the museum is trying to do some work about the present.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, there were several commissions that came with the redesign. So we worked extensively with artist Linda Yamani, Ramsey and Ohlone artist and scholar. And so there are several pieces within the new design of the exhibition that are Linda's work. Now, these were commissions. We were asking Linda and in conversation with her around what those pieces would specifically be. There's a Thule boat and now 3 baskets. In terms of contemporary artists, we are growing contemporary Native art within the collection, and that was actually a recent acquisition project. But through that acquisition project, there were not actually in the ultimate decision. I'm thinking back through who was even involved in the process. The students were reviewing some works by Ohlone artists, but the individuals that were ultimately selected and the artworks that entered our collection are not from the Ohlone community.
Amy, I think I just wanted to call out to you because I think there won't be time for me to read another section if we want to have time for questions. So I'm just checking in with you.
We have until 1:45, so I don't know.
Oh, we do. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe there is some time then. I thought we had until 1:30.
Oh,
Okay, should I do that and then we'll open it up to questions? We'll just bear with me for one moment while I stop sharing for a moment to get the slides in the right place.
Robin, I'm sorry. I was wrong. We have until 1:30.
Okay, so then maybe I shouldn't read another section because I think that it takes about 9 minutes and that would give us no time for questions. So should I turn it over to you, Amy, or?
Yeah, that's fine. Hi, we are opening up the session now for any questions that you have. So please let us know if you have any questions. And I would also say that if no questions come in immediately, I would like to open this up to the 3 panelists to ask questions of each other. So there are no questions yet. We'll wait for some to come in.
Well, I'm really interested in the interventions that you're doing at the museum on campus at Santa Clara University, like taking on those questions and then actually implementing something to address those questions in the practice of the museum. I know, for movements like the Black Arts movement, like get rid of the museum. Like we don't even want the museum. We want art on street corners and in prisons and, the places where the people are. And that really, you asked that question at the end of your presentation, like how does art reach people where they are? And I wondered how you think about that in terms of museum practice and the work you do.
Certainly. I think for us, so much of it is actually leaning into the fact that we're a university museum. So for us, our immediate community is Santa Clara, is the students, faculty, and staff, and really diving into that and involving them in curation, in collections work, in these conversations is where we want to keep moving, and seeing that as our way to push that needle forward and make those changes. But we've had that conversation of, what does it mean to be that building right on campus that not everyone knows what it is? And we're, at the end of the day, still a building that has areas that we can't invite the public into, or can we? We don't, right? I mean, there's a lot of questions that I think that's a lot of it of asking why we do those things and don't just accept that's the way that we do them or that they've always been done. And then balancing that with our role as, stewards for the collection. We want to preserve, but even preserved and collecting, right, has all these lines. So it's just it's a lot of questioning, and there's days that it feels like we can't move forward. But I think taking those steps back and opening up the dialogue makes it clear how to move forward as opposed to keeping it insular.
Yeah, just having students and other people perform the act of curation opens up the white box, right? And it can, I think, in literature to anthologizing, what goes in the anthology and why, and who represents American literature, and for what purpose. And that's a very contested question among literary scholars.
I'm also just thinking in a little exchange that we had prior to this, Lauren, you were mentioning that the museum is thinking about, I don't know if it's exactly alt text, but keywords and how that gets applied to images, which is really an interesting thing to consider. And for me, with this recent, including images into a text and seeing, obviously the good work of trying to make visual material accessible to a wide variety of folks. How do you do that, but also not perpetrate another kind of violence? So for me, those alt text tags on the Amy Cooper image and on the images of Bryant and Millam sanitizes, almost takes a position of supposed objectivity to describe what's in the image, which inscribes another kind of violence in suggesting that there's a person holding a dog is what's pictured, or people in a courtroom.
I actually have a question from someone in the audience. It's for Robin. And the question is, I was really interested in the way your project replaced the alt text for images with Benjamin Moore white paint names. In doing so, you bring attention to the whiteness that is invisibilized by the earlier titles. But the paint names also multiply whiteness by the sheer volume of names. What did this multiplicity and diversity of names for white come to mean for you as you worked on this project?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think, first of all, just what the names are really rich sites for investigation, and especially what the names, how the paint colors for white are named in comparison to, let's say, the paint colors for Black or other colors. While some of the names for the Black paint colors included things like Black Jet and Black Kingdom, there was Twilight, which is the name of the section that I didn't read. The Twilight Zone was one, and also Abyss, versus the colors for white, the names, right? White Opulence, Genesis, Patriotic, Pure White. I mean, I think obviously Ralph Ellison and lots of other people have already kind of thought about this, but the fact that it persists into the present time, and that I don't know if there's an accessible archive at Benjamin Moore yet, but I would love to visit it if it exists, and to sort of understand what's the history of how these things have been named, who has named them, and obviously they reflect racism, basically, and they become interesting places to dive in further. When I replaced the alt text with the paint names, there's a certain insufficiency in that act, obviously, for naming what's going on. For example, what's happening with the courtroom photos, that the paint names alone don't do necessarily a better job. And I think they do a better job than the existing alt text, but I have a question about that. I think a lot of this project is about letting in doubt and incertitude and seeing where one fails in the attempt to investigate this topic. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it seems to me rather than like a call and response or a question and answer, that those slides with the alt text are just opening up the whole question. You're saying like, well, what is whiteness? You know, it doesn't exist if it just says woman with a dog. But then it starts to exist through these names that are used for paint colors. So what else, you know, what else is a part of that?
I would say the paint names too also reflect the history, right? When you start reading about the construction of whiteness, it has a long history and it's always in tension with Blackness in particular, but also it's always it can't understand itself. There is no
Right.
thing without difference, and that becomes that the paint names also kind of body that forth, I think, this work for me.
Yeah.
Oh, Amy, you're muted.
Sorry, there's another question that's come in as well as a comment. So I'm going to read the comment first. And it's Robin. There's underlying themes of home and belonging to these Benjamin Moore colors. When we choose paint colors, we often do it to make our home our own. There's some potential here to get into the racialization of housing and home owning in the United States. And then the question is, appreciating the alt text being visually impaired and all, even with the artistic liberties in it, is there a way I can learn more about this topic through popular media like film or TV?
I think I need to understand the second question a little better, but I will say about the first question about the potential to investigate home ownership and all that's that undergirds that, thinking about redlining and who gets to own a home where, all of that, absolutely. And in fact, some of the advertisements, the historical advertisements from Benjamin Moore, I almost included some of those in the slides. You know, they are depicting these white environments. There's also peopled, obviously, by white people in the early part of or for much of the company's history. And the company also has I think it's called the Historic or Heritage Collection, which again, thinking about ownership and property, the names are things like Hamilton, or like these American names that are largely tied to New England. But again, yeah, there's just a ton of resonance there. And yeah, I think this piece can sort of be opened up at any point for deeper dives on any of these topics, which is what makes it so, like, it's turned into something really compelling. There's plenty of spaces to travel anew in thinking about all the aspects of whiteness as an institution in this country. The second question, which was about the alt texts, was the question about where to find out more about alt texts.
I think so.
If it is, I don't really know. I have to say, this is a pretty recent observation that I've had. So I don't know, like, how do those get generated? Are they generated by some sort of, algorithm? Is it a human being who's sitting down and writing those alt texts? I mean, we, for example, in our courses, if we include material on Camino, we are asked to generate that alt text. But as it pertains to images that are just out there on the web, I have a feeling that it must be some automated program that does that, but it's absolutely worth further investigation for sure.
Okay, I want to thank Robin and Kathy Lou and Lauren for the conversation that we've had today. We are at time, so I want to be cognizant of other people's schedules, and we'll be ending the session. But again, a huge thank you to all three of you, and I hope we can keep this conversation going in some way, particularly vis-a-vis how it affects our own institution of the Dissay Museum at Santa Clara University. But thank you again, Robin, Kathy Lou, Lauren, thank you so much.
Thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.